This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations.
Stuff in the background.
Did the Holy Grail end up in Brazil? Possibly. Well, today we will take a trip with Dr. Kathleen Ball to Brazil, where she discovered a Templar cave while exploring the backcountry in the Chapada National Reserves. A cave carved by Knights Templar, which has provided evidence of early Templars' travel to the Americas. Is it possible? Well, today we're going to find out. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, Dr. Kathleen Ball. Yay!
Hey, Tony, how are you?
How are you doing? I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on the show.
Well, first of all, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and everybody out there had a great Thanksgiving. I know I am not too stuffed. What about you?
Oh, it's better today.
Right.
Last night was a different story, but yeah, we've been just cleaning up today around here.
A lot of turkey leftovers.
We had the whole family. We had about 17.
Ooh.
Today.
Did you have to cook it all?
Yeah, it was wonderful. We have everything from, children to grandchildren to great-grandchildren now. So it was
wow.
really fun.
You don't look old enough to barely have grandchildren, let alone great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
Well,
it's really nice. We don't get to see everybody all in one place, but twice a year, and that's Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Well, that's what the holidays are for, is to get together and celebrate each other. But I'm excited to have you here, and definitely, like in the intro, like I said, we're going to travel to Brazil, and I have to say, I married a Brazilian. I love Brazil. I've been to the Amazon several times. I love going to the Amazon. But before we go and talk about the Templars and the Holy Grail and your travels, I do want to touch on your NDE.
Well, there's a number of different perspectives on what the actual Grail is.
Right.
And, one of which is that it's the actual blood of Christ and Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene.
Right.
Through their descendants, through their children. There is some research that has led people to believe that it's actually a cup that held Jesus's blood. However, that really doesn't hold water in terms of research, because the Jews back at that time when Jesus was crucified, well, even today, it's still the same thing. Touching the body fluids of someone who's deceased was really, it was a sin. It was just sacrilegious, and it didn't happen. So the chances of that happening are really, really slim. I really, I don't buy that one. The other possibility, which is this is what I think myself, this is what I believe myself, is I just recently found out, I went to the Disclosure Fest. I spoke at the Disclosure Fest in Las Vegas about a week ago, and I met with Timothy Hogan, and I was aware of the alchemical process and the calcination, etc. But apparently there is a fifth process in that, after the calcination process, that you actually get a red liquid that is very similar in its chemical makeup to ayahuasca, which is really interesting, because ayahuasca, I've been through ayahuasca experiences myself. The first time I healed 7 cancer tumors, and the second time I got off all anti-rejection medication post liver transplant, which is just doesn't happen.
Great. Yeah.
So I know what that can be used for, and it is definitely a healing method that I believe in. I absolutely believe in. So if this red liquid, the fifth step in the alchemical process, is actually this red fluid, they called it the blood of Christ, by the way. So So there's new research now that's surfacing, and this looks like a very strong possibility that this may be what they called the Holy Grail. Now, the Holy Grail is it's different from the actual Grail quest. And a Grail quest is what the Templars went through to become a Templar. It's the initiation processes and things they had to go through. They had to give up, their worldly goods, etc., become celibate, all these things. And also, go into the Holy Land and fight. Many of them did go into the Holy Land and fight. But the Grail process, the Grail quest itself, can be done by anyone. And a contemporary Grail quest is just stepping out of your comfort zone into your own specific destiny, your journey. And that just stepping out and doing that will eventually, are on your Grail quest. And your life, you will go through initiations, you will go through challenges, you'll go through all these things that will naturally hone, your spiritual, right. I mean, it's just going to happen. That's what's happened with me. And that is basically what my book is about, is that backstory before I found the cave, what took place before I found the cave. It's a Grail quest, discovery of a mysterious Knights Templar Cave in Brazil. Yes, I did discover that Knights Templar Cave in Brazil, but I also, after that, when I went back in 2021 to film and really, really do some research on the glyphs and graffiti that I found inside the cave, and I also wanted to interview the Amazonian tribes that come into the area, into Alto Paraiso, and have been for several hundred years. I wanted to find out if they were the ones that actually led the Templars into Brazil, into central Brazil from Bahia. They were not the tribe, by the way, but they did know of a band of men, of Europeans, that did come into Brazil hundreds of years ago. And this is pretty common knowledge amongst the Amazonian tribes. So that in itself has been my quest, and it's still ongoing. I believe it'll be ongoing until I die.
Well, can I ask
the finality, I guess, in your Grail quest is your death, is meeting your death with courage and unafraid. And this is what I felt when I went into the dungeon in Dome, France in 2009. I was given the keys, which was, odd in itself. But that's just one of the synchronicities along my own Grail quest. I was handed the keys to the dungeon and told that I could go in there and photograph and do whatever I wanted and bring the keys back when I was done. So I did. I went in and I photographed everything, which, by the way, was what enabled me to identify the cave in Brazil, was because I had seen the same tool markings in the dungeon, and also the same crosses. So, in that dungeon, I felt everything. I'm an empath. Since I had a near-death experience in 1990, I'm very sensitive to energy. So in that space, in this dungeon space, I felt everything from despair, fear, hatred, all the emotions that you go through as a human being, all the way to peace. And it was really, really interesting to be able to feel that peace that I believe they finally came to before they were burned at the stake. And, obviously they were not afraid of death, because they denounced everything that they had set up until that point. They had been tortured, and they had all given statements that they later said were false, that they had been tortured, and they did it, because they were being tortured. Right. And so they denounced all of those at them right before their deaths. So that tells me, that they reached that ultimate end in a Grail quest. Right. And they got to the point where they were no longer afraid of death.
Well, yeah, no, I've heard that, but one thing I'm really curious of even getting started on this journey is, it's a very male dominated, Knights Templar, Masons. I mean, they've as of recent started letting women, be a part of it, but not many of the ceremonies are still not part of it. How did you get involved in looking in this direction of the?
Did I get involved?
Well, just get involved in this project. How did you get accepted, and how did you get involved in the first place? I'm curious.
Well, that is really interesting. From the time I had my near-death experience, I started just researching like crazy, everything. Yeah. I read the Bible like 300 or 400 times, really focusing in on the Old Testament, the New Testament, every single spiritual belief system. I have a PhD in metaphysical sciences as a result of my research. All the spiritual belief systems on the planet, the roots of the religions that we know and practice, that most people know and practice today. And that eventually led me to Kabbalah, to mystical studies, also Leonardo da Vinci and King Francis I and his involvement in esoteric beliefs and studies, which naturally I'm sure he shared with Leonardo. I believe they both shared those. Right. And then that eventually led me to the Knights Templar. That was in the late 1990s, early 2000s that started happening. And the Da Vinci Code came out in 2003, which everybody, that's what brought the Templars and brought all this stuff to the forefront, into everyone's living room. Yeah. And I think it was phenomenal. Even though it was a novel, it was phenomenal because everyone knows about Mary Magdalene. They know about, the bloodline. They know about the Templars. They know about all of these things now. So he did a tremendous service for all of us in our search, on our collective search for truth as a species. He did a tremendous service to all of us, by putting that book out and the film. And the film, this is what really jump-started my interest in the Templars and secret societies. Was I was in Italy when the Da Vinci Code film came out in 2006. I was there delivering a portrait. I was an artist all my life. And I was delivering a portrait that I had done in bronze of Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci, to the Vinci Museum in Italy. Right. And so while I was there, we went from Vinci, Italy into Florence, and then Florence into Rome. And when we got into Rome, we were following the path of Leonardo da Vinci with a class that I took a tour over there, kids, and students. Right. Anyway, so we get into Rome, and wow, the Catholic Church is just flipping out. They have filed a lawsuit against Dan Brown. I mean, they were really upset. And so I think to myself, well, why are they so upset about a novel? Right. That makes unless there's some truth. Right. They would have been better off if they would have did nothing. Right. But their reaction told the whole world that they had something to hide. Told the whole world. It worked completely opposite from, I think, what they had expected or anticipated. So anyway, then I really started diving into, not only the Templars and the history of the Templars, but then, were they connected to the Masons? The Masons show up. Now, many of the family members, they are also descendants, current Masons are also descendants of Templars. So all these things started just fascinating me. And I was seeing connections with the Rosicrucian, the Masons, the Templars, and many of them were all studying the same things, right? They were studying these esoteric beliefs that had been brought forward from what I can tell, even earlier than Sumer and Egypt. I mean, they claim that they go back to Egypt, and you can trace these esoteric beliefs and practices to Egypt. But I also believe in my research that they go all the way back to Lemuria. So, what I found in my cave there was actually, with amongst the Templar crosses that I discovered in my cave, I also discovered a Lemurian cross. So that told me that the Templars had some affiliation or knowledge of Lemuria, of Lemurian practices, in order to have carved that cross into the cave wall. So, so that takes it even further from what I believe at this point, which is even more fascinating. And so I have been on that track for about the last year and a half.
Well, that's great. In
the
fact,
Lemurian connection.
Well, that's great. And we talk about the cave, and before we even get into the cave part, and we've talked about how you got into this, but the Templars weren't in Brazil first. So where did they originate? In fact, somebody in the chat room asked, has she heard anything about the Knights Templar presence in Portugal? And if so, does she think they helped start the overseas travel in the 1400s? So
absolutely. Yeah, the Templars that went into Brazil, they had come from Portugal. King Dinis at the time that the Templars were, they were being persecuted throughout the rest of Europe. Portugal was still a holdout. Portugal, excuse me, Portugal was a sovereign nation that the Templars were very involved in creating that country, that nation. And they believed in equality. They took in the Cathars, they took in the Druids, they took in the Jews, they took in, excuse me,
get a drink.
But they took in the Moors, they took in Islam, they took in all the people, even if they conquered, like with the Moors and Islam. Even after they conquered them, they brought them back into their society, gave them land, and they lived harmoniously until the 1500s, which is when the Inquisition finally got into Portugal with the Inquisition. And that's when, the Templars had to go underground, because up until that point, King Dinis allowed the Templars to keep their property allowed them to remain in Portugal, keep their property and their wealth. And they just basically renamed them the Knights of Christ at that point. That was like in 1314. So Portugal is really, truly a Templar nation. Freddie Silver, that book that Freddie Silver wrote, is an excellent source of information on that. He's an excellent researcher on the background of Portugal itself, having been actually established by the Templars.
Oh, sorry. Thought you cut out there for a second, but no. And in fact, we were talking about Templars, like you said, are pretty much in every culture, every country that you can think of. But why do you feel that the Templars chose to go to Brazil? What led them there? Was it to hide something? Was it to protect themselves? What was your theory on that?
A combination of things. When they were in the Holy Land and they were under the Temple Mount, we have evidence. We have strong evidence now that they were under the Temple Mount. We have found Templar artifacts now underneath in the tunnels. I believe that they got a hold of Phoenician maps and genealogies. I think those were much more important to them than any gold or silver or anything at that time. But I think that they had maps to travel. The Phoenicians traveled all over the world, So I think the Templars got these maps, and they knew that there was a continent, South America, and I think they went even as early as the possibly even 1090. One of the crosses that are in my cave, one of the crosses that I found in the cave, there's actually 3 of them. Is almost identical to a cross on a chapel in Peniche, Portugal, that was constructed in 1090. So That's the earliest one that I have found. And I've also found them in Spain, in France, and in Istanbul, which used to be Constantinople, which is where the Templars also were, which many people don't know, and in Greece. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't know, is that they actually organized in the probably as early as 1040 in Greece, before going to Constantinople and then going into the Holy Land for the Crusades. But my research now has led me to an older order of knights. They weren't called Templar Knights, but they were protecting the builders of the Second Temple in 600 BC under Zerubbabel. And they were specifically organized to protect the builders of that Second Temple. And if I'm going into Portugal, and I'm really excited in February to see some ancient documents that belong to a family that were Templar. They were a Templar family. And I'm hoping to connect the dots to this band, this order of knights from 600 BC to the current knights, and the knights that were established in 1100s officially.
Right.
But I think they were some of the same family members. I believe there were some of the same family members, because the original 9 knights were Jewish. They were Jews. And so, the Jewish families carried information by word of mouth, passed down from generation to generation to generation. They didn't necessarily write things down, except for in their own family records that were private. So I have every reason to believe that they probably carried a lot of information forward through these family, oral transmissions that went from generation to generation. So it stands to reason that between the Phoenician maps and this oral tradition that of passing down this information, that they probably had a pretty good idea of where South America was long before they ever took the trip.
Right. Well, like I said, I've been to the Amazon. I've been to Brazil. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people. I'm curious though, going to Brazil, from Portugal, some of these people may not be originally from Portugal. So going to a whole different continent and different country, especially back then, is very risky. You don't know what's there. You don't know who you're going to encounter, animals, people, and you would think they would build temples or something closer to the shoreline, but this particular cave, and I want to find out how this cave was discovered, but this particular cave's quite a ways inland towards just north of Brasilia, I believe.
Right.
So
it's 3.5 hours from Brasilia. Alto Paraiso, the Chapada, is 3.5 hours north of Brasilia. And it's a very long distance from the Atlantic coast, where Bahia, which is where we think they landed in Bahia, and were brought into the central Brazil by the Amazonian tribes. Now, what I do know for a fact that I found out on my second visit to Brazil — I've been to Brazil numerous times, I go just about every year.
Wow.
Was that the cave itself was a gold mine.
Oh, okay. But the thing is, there's a picture of you with the cross up top of it.
Right. So this cave being a gold mine really changes things a lot. You have to figure, during the late, from 1290, after the last battle in the Holy Land for the Templars,
right,
and here we are, 1307. We have 27 years. The Templars they had no. For the kings, they really had they weren't useful anymore.
Right.
They weren't fighting in the Holy Land for the Holy Land. They were still used as mercenaries by some of the monarchies, but they had really kind of outlived their use, and they they had most of the money, they had a lot of land, they were very powerful, and they were now considered a threat to the monarchies, and obviously to, King Philip the Fair in France, who is the one that started this whole campaign to to take out the Templars, basically because he owed them a lot of money and he wanted to get rid of his debt. I mean, that was really, really the reason. But during this time frame, Portugal was flourishing. So the King Dinis, right, was flourishing. He was building nautical schools, in Peniche. I mean, what do you build a nautical college for, right? It's manned by Templars in Peniche. And, he was building things. He was not dealing with the same financial challenges that many of the other monarchies were. So where was he getting all this money? Where was he getting all this gold and the silver? So it made sense to me when I found out that there was not only the cave that I discovered, but there are other caves. And I found this out when I interviewed the Kalunga people. The Kalunga in Brazil they're the descendants of the runaway slaves from the late 1400s, early 1500s, the Portuguese slavers and Spanish slavers. And they left, they escaped the ships as soon as they docked, and they ran inland. And guess where they ended up? Alto Paraiso. And guess where they hid? They hid out in my cave. And also they mentioned other caves that they hid out in. So that establishes two things. A, that the caves were already there in the late 1400s, 1500s, right? And that they were able to, they were large enough for they could live in and stay and hide in these caves.
Right.
And so that was huge. That was huge little bit of information, that they gave me. And also it established why I wasn't able to find artifacts and things, because I took metal detector all around the cave for, probably about at least a half an acre radius around the cave. And I didn't find artifacts, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't find any artifacts. Well, the Kalungas, they told me that they stripped the areas of anything that was of any value because they were starving. I mean, they had to survive. They were in survival mode.
Right.
And so anything that they found, they repurposed for whatever they could, use it for. And they basically, they even mined some of the gold that was in the caves as well. They were very familiar with the fact that they were gold mines. So.
Well, have you ever had, I'm sure you know Scott Walter, forensic geologist. Have you ever had him or somebody that tested these rocks and these carvings to kind of figure out when they were carved and did a little more research on that? Because, I mean, if you go into the cave, man, some of these.
Well, we haven't been able to get anybody in there yet. I'm hoping for my third film that we're going to be able to get a film crew, which will include archaeologists, because you can't date stone, And
right, you're right.
Right, you can't date stone; it's impossible. From my I know quite a bit about the Templars at this point, and I know quite a bit about their rocks and their crosses and the dating and etc. And my professional opinion is that the crosses in the cave really help to establish the dating. And, like I said, these crosses that I've found, not just in my cave, but in Greece, in Peniche,
very similar,
in all throughout Portugal, in Dome, France, where they held the Templars during that time frame specifically, and also in what is now Istanbul, which used to be Constantinople. They're the exact same crosses, but not only that, the exact same tool markings.
Oh, wow.
So that's what's important. It's the hand tools that were used to not only carve out the cave, but also the graffiti itself. These are hand tools. So It's it's pretty good. It's pretty strong evidence of the dating and also the establishing the fact that they are Templar.
How long do you
creations.
think? Can you kind of tell from a certain point? Because as 100 years, an artist is a different artist is going to carve differently. Can you
Right.
tell the different artists of in the cave? And do you feel like there is a time span from beginning to the last carving to go in that cave?
Yeah, judging from the first carvings that I've seen of this particular cross, and to the last ones I see, the oldest ones I see, which are 1314, I've established that these crosses had to have been made between 1090 and 1314, somewhere in there. They could have been maybe even as late as some of the Knights of Christ later on, 1340, 1350, maybe.
Right.
But that's stretching it. Because they went to that square cross, that you see now. They went to that, the one that you see behind me
Right.
on the Templar robes. They went to that with the Knights of Christ, and that was pretty uniform. They're using that still today. So these other crosses were much earlier. And throughout Turkey, which is interesting because many Christians went into Turkey when they fled the Holy Land, when they fled Rome, when they fled, for their lives between the 1st and 3rd century. And here's where you see these crosses. I have found them in Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, these same crosses. So that's the 1st to 3rd century, which just really blows my mind. Now, I don't think that this cave was carved during that time, but I believe that they used a variety of different crosses that were probably taken from the Coptic Christians that settled in Turkey at that time. And then they continued to use them when they established themselves at the Knights of Christ in the 1100s. So, but then again, we have this chapel in Peniche, Portugal, 1090, and here we have one of these crosses.
That's
So
amazing. I mean,
it tells me that they were being used for a very long time until they became more conformed to this cross you see behind me. But that didn't happen until much later.
So my in-laws, they're from Manaus, so they are right on the Amazon River, which is north, full-fledged, Amazon forest. So I know how dense that forest is. You can stand there and really can't see 10 feet into the forest itself. What is the forest around that area? Because it's gorgeous from the pictures I've seen. It's amazing. But what is the forest like? And I couldn't even imagine what other gems are out there, even not too far, if it is as packed as the forest up north.
Well, what's really interesting about the Alto Paraiso area, my cave that I discovered is surrounded by Alto Paraiso. It's actually in the territory of Alto Paraiso. Just below it, though, is a small town called Moino. And just over, not far from that, is another town called Saint George, which means St. George. And then not far on the other end, going the other direction, is a town called Cavalcanche, which is where the Kalunga have settled. They were given territory in Cavalcanche. And according to them, there's the other caves that exist are in the Cavalcanche area. So I'm sorry, what was your question at the beginning?
Just saying that the forest is so dense. At least I know up in Manaus, in the Amazon, where I couldn't even imagine what else is out there.
Okay, the forest area. Okay, this is what's fascinating about this whole area: Cavalcanche, Moino, San George, and Alto Paraiso, and right around the cave area.
Right.
All the way up into this area, this huge area, you see, typical Brazilian trees. They're small. They don't have large trees. Yeah, you see in the area here. Yeah, Alto Paraiso de Goya in this area here. Okay, so what you see are just typical the small Brazilian trees, and in this area, Alto Paraiso, Moinhos, São Jorge, Cavalcante, are palm trees,
Oh, wow.
mango trees,
Mm,
avocado.
nice.
It's really, Alto Paraiso means high paradise, and it really is a paradise. And they don't know how long it's been since, these trees were planted there, but it's really a paradise. And not only that, but it seems to draw people from all over the world, all religious, all educational
Hmm.
backgrounds, all economic backgrounds, all cultural backgrounds. I mean, you can walk down the street in Alto Paraiso and you can talk to someone from Germany, France,
Mm-hmm.
India, Africa, all within a block. It's phenomenal. And this is what you had in Portugal. This is what the Templars established in Portugal. So
Yeah.
I find it ironic that here we are in South America, where it's typically very Catholic.
Yes.
The
yes.
continent itself is primarily Catholic beliefs, and you have this little area, this comparatively little area that is harmonious, and these people are living harmoniously from all walks of life.
Wow. Do you see, because
that I find very interesting.
I do find that interesting, and I've heard that too. Just a lot, of course, a lot of Germans, a lot of Portugals, a lot of different people from all over the world, definitely. But I'm curious on. As in Masons, you see a lot of Mason lodges, different places. You see a lot of Mason carvings on buildings. What about the Knights Templar? Were they more secretive in Brazil? And I'm curious, have you heard of other areas of discovery of this type of?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I have. Most recently, I heard about evidence of the Templars. I was sent some photos from a source in Peru, and apparently there were Templar presence, and they have artifacts. They have some artifacts. They have crosses. They have some chainmail. There's, I think, a sword and some other things.
Wow.
And I have to examine because they're not in situ, obviously. So that's going to be an issue.
Right.
But there's also markings on stone and whatnot in the area too. So that's what I'll be looking at. And I also have heard rumors now that they were in Ecuador and there were other areas. So my next trek back to South America, I'm going to be branching out into Peru and some other areas and following up on these leads because I believe the Templars were all over the continent.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So what about the government? Has the government, because I know sometimes it's hard in Brazil to get the government to move very quickly, but how's the government, because in America this would be either like a historical site or preserved. What is the preservation of this cave and their involvement in this discovery?
Well, so far the government hasn't taken too much interest.
Yeah.
The people who have taken interest are our academia. I'm connected to people there that are Templar researchers in it, and they are also Masons, by the way, who support my work and who are doing as much research as they can. In fact, Luis Salvi is changing some of his books as a result of this discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And he has, he has been in constant contact with me and says that this cave has drawn some interest amongst the Templars in Europe. And I guess they recently made a pilgrimage from Central America and followed some Mason marks that the Templars had left from Central America all the way up through into Bahia and inland from the coast of Bahia. So there's many people that think I'm going to find a Templar treasure. So they're pretty interested in what I'm doing over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and I say this publicly because I have told the Templars this myself, but if I do find this treasure, which is highly possible. I mean, and anybody that's over there doing the research could find if it's there. But I would turn it over to the Templars because it belongs to them.
Yeah.
And I also believe in their agenda. So I would support that. Only thing I would want to be able to do is photograph for my research purposes, the contents or whatever I'm able to discover if that happens. But there is some belief right now that the Templars buried treasure in numerous places. And now we have found them. Scott Wolter has found evidence of Templars in India.
Wow.
I know that they were in Ethiopia. I know they were all over Africa. They were in Egypt. They were throughout Europe. Now we know they're in South America. We know they're in North America. They were quite extensive travelers.
Sounds like
and they were secret about it. They did not advertise, their travels. So, during the 1307 to 1314, when they were being persecuted, I think that's when they traveled and went abroad and probably buried their treasures. And they had that prophecy that they were going to return in 700 years. So I believe that now's the time that these truths are going to come out, that the treasure is going to come out. I think a lot of truth is going to start coming out in relation to the Templars.
I have two more questions. And in the cave, so I'll just go ahead and just throw them both out there. In the cave, we've talked about a lot about the crosses. Of the carvings, is there anything in particular about, prophecies, or what are the meanings of some of these carvings? And then what are the agenda of the Knights Templar that makes it still relevant today? We think, that was back then. What's their purpose now? So let's start with the carvings.
Well, the carvings, I think, were communication. You see this is Royston here.
Right.
The Royston Cave in the UK. And Gretchen Cornwall has researched this quite extensively. She's a friend of mine and fellow researcher. And she has extensively done a tremendous amount of research. Now, on that last frame, there was a cross that's very similar to what is in my cave as well. So we see those right here. I don't know if you can see where my finger is pointing, but right here we've got a cross that's very similar. There's two heart-looking sort of forms below it. Yeah.
Yep, I see it.
So that's very similar to one of the crosses. Now, in my cave, there are also some other graffiti that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to initially, but I'm going to, when I go back, photograph extensively, because we believe that these may have been not only Templar Mason marks, but they may have been part of this secret language that the Templars may have had that communicated to each other. Directional, some of this stuff may have been directional to lead people to certain things, whatnot. And I think that may have been the agenda of the current Templars that came over for that pilgrimage that they were following. I think they may understand this language. They may have somehow discovered something, that gave them this information. If not, it was brought forward through to today. Right. But I was at the procession that commemorated and celebrated the reunification of the Templars in 2019 worldwide, globally, in Tomar, Portugal. I happened to have been there for that and photographed the whole thing. It was phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. I literally wept as I was walking down from the castle in Tomar down to the St. John the Baptist Church. And then finally, we ended up in front of the little chapel that's dedicated to Mary Magdalene. It was an incredibly powerful event. I can't even tell you how powerful, but it's in my film. I mean, I have clips of it in my first film, The Brazilian Templar Mystery. You'll see some clips And I do show clips on my Facebook page, my website, and, some of my other pages. You can see some of those clips. But it was incredibly powerful. And again, it was the result of this prophecy that they would return in 700 years and fulfill their agenda. And I believe that their agenda is to bring about heaven on earth. They support a unification of all people, all religious beliefs and economic backgrounds. And I really believe that this is their agenda. Their agenda and their intent is to bring this about. And so I support that.
That sounds amazing. And in fact, Sarah must have went to Stairway to the Stars, because she said, what connections have you seen in your research with the arcs that Timothy Hogan mentioned at Disclosure Fest?
What can you say that again?
Sure. What connections have you seen in your research with the arcs, it must be Ark of the Covenant, that Timothy Hogan mentioned at Disclosure Fest?
Oh, okay. Well, basically, more of what we talked about was the Grail quest and the alchemical process. That's really more of what Timothy and I discussed. But what was really, interesting to begin with, when I first saw Timothy speak, and I think it was on Fade to Black or something with Jimmy Church. Anyway, he mentioned that the Templars had organized in Greece, which was my theory.
It was
just a theory to me, and that they had gone into Constantinople because I had found all those crosses inside Darren Kuyu, and I knew that happened. It was my theory, but he corroborated that. And so that was really cool.
That's a nice validation.
That was just cool. It was really cool. And so Timothy and I, we've had some really good conversations, and hoping to have some, more in-depth conversations in the future. We traded books. So I'm reading his books now, and I'm assuming he's probably reading mine. Also with Scott Wolter, the same thing, and I think Scott's onto some really fascinating research right now too, that he'll be divulging hopefully within a year or so. But I can promise you that there are some phenomenal research that is about to be announced from many different people on discoveries of the Templars within this next year.
See, that's what we want. That's what we love on Truth Be Told. It's great to talk about old stories over and over, but when we see things moving forward and hearing things that are possibility of getting some disclosure and some of these mysteries that we've been talking about, that some answers can be given to us. So I always say thank you to people like yourself that go out there and do these researches in the jungles and in the different countries and all over the world, people like us that may not get to travel to all these places. So what you should do one of these days is take a tour down to Brazil and go to this cave and maybe have some people go with you. I think that would be amazing.
I have a tour coming up that's going to go into Portugal and France to Templar sites in October, and it'll be on my website after the first of the year.
Perfect.
I'm still, setting up the hotels and that sort of stuff, and I'll have the whole itinerary on my website by the end of January. And we already have 25 people signed up for that. I know. It's like, woo-hoo. A lot of people are really interested in this. After that, I think, because that's going to be in October 2024. So I'm looking at setting up another tour into Brazil, because I've had a lot of interest and people wanting to go into Brazil. And I'm hoping to have this information about the Templar sites in Peru as well. So we may include that in that particular tour. So those are going to be coming up. 24 and 25, so people can they have something to look forward to. Now to go into the cave area itself, is you have to be in pretty good physical shape for that. It's not a walk in the park. It's 4 to 5 kilometers straight down the side of a mountain. So to get to the entrance of the cave. Yeah, it's it's pretty rough hiking. And then of course you have to come back up.
I was going to say, maybe going down is you're just the terrain, but going back up, you got terrain and the incline. So that might be your biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, I would love to do something like that. Maybe one of these days I'll get to go down with you and see it for myself. Like I said, I love Brazil. In fact, we're going to go there again, and
it's really exciting. And the other thing that on the way into the cave, which is one of the reasons I suspected it was a gold mine, was the whole area is surrounded. It's just crystals, quartz crystals all over the place.
Yeah.
And there's a huge vein. There's a huge vein that's about 1 meter width by 1 meter in height that spans at least 2 to 3 kilometers right through the middle of this property, and crushed quartz crystal all outside the mouth of the cave. It's all over the place.
Oh, wow.
So, it's just sort of an added little plus when you're going to the cave, down to the cave areas. You can find these crystals. They're all over.
Well, okay, this is my last question, I promise. Because Renee in the chat room brought this up, and not necessarily a question, but I'm going to add it as a question. A lot of times things are built on ley lines. Stonehenge and many different. Have you ever checked the map to see if it is on a ley line?
I haven't myself, but one of my very close friends, Kate Preston in the UK, she's an expert in ley lines. And when I get, hopefully, on my trip to Portugal, I'm planning also to go into Scotland to talk with some researchers in Scotland. I'm going to connect with Kate and see if she's willing, or if she has already, information on ley lines, because I suspect that, and all these power sites that I've been to in the world, they're on top of ley lines.
Yeah.
They're almost always on top of ley lines.
I love it. Well, Dr. Kathleen, please, thank you, and come back again, and thank you for joining us today. Will you come back and talk more about this, and also about your near-death experience? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. You can get the book on Amazon.com, or you can send me a private message on Facebook, Kathleen Ball, or the Templars in Brazil on Facebook, and I will send you a signed author's copy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, and I can't wait to have you back. And in Parapod, I have a paranormal festival that I started this year. It did really well, and when we get the second one put together, I'd love to have you come and speak at it. So I'll reach out to you and see if you're interested.
Well, thank you so much, Tony. I really enjoyed speaking with you and talking, for your audience. It was wonderful.
It was
really
wonderful. Yes,
it.
I had
a
great time.
Afternoon.
Great time. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in the day after Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for giving up your Black Friday specials and coming and being part of Truth Be Told. We want to please ask you to share the show, like it, leave good comments, go listen to our podcast on Apple and iHeart and all the different outlets, and just share the show, because without you, there wouldn't be a Truth Be Told. This month is my 15th year of podcasting, so thank you for being a part of that all these years. I still have people from day one that have been part of it. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. I'll see you next Friday in December. It's going to be December. Take care, guys. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.